the attendees right now, Elisa and Kiran. They're going to be our first presenters after our opening. Thank you for that so much. Appreciate you all. I hope you're well. I hope you're safe. I hope you're warm. I really appreciate you all making time for an additional meeting this week as we work to really get to our finalization of this first round of recommendations. So I'm always just so grateful to be in space with you all. The subcommittees, the work groups, have all been working diligently the past week and a half to get us information for consideration today. And so really grateful for that. Want to acknowledge that this month is Native American Heritage Month, and we have so much to be grateful for and to celebrate and to work towards here in our own state of New Mexico. And in acknowledging and working for equity and justice for our Indigenous relatives. Also important to acknowledge the land and the Pueblo, Navajo, and Apache peoples who are the traditional custodians of the land, and the deep connections to the land and significant contributions that have been made and continue to be made to the broader community statewide. Today is my late grandfather's birthday, and it reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from the author Octavia Butler that says, "We are a harvest of survivors, but then that's what we've always been." So I leave that with you as an offering to carry us forward today. And so, Dr. Katira and Elisa, I believe you are going to be presenting the Education Subcommittee's recommendations. So I'll turn over to you.
Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, Kiran, can we wait for just a second? We're trying to get our interpreters into the room. So if you don't mind holding off for just a second, I think it's really important that we keep our meeting accessible in that way. I super apologize, but while we're waiting to get our interpreters, I will remind people that we have agreed that we will record these sessions for public, and so this meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, Amy. I apologize. I just jumped right in. Thank you.
I am not sure of the name of our interpreters, so interpreters, if you wouldn't mind just letting us know through the chat when you get into the room, if you're in the room, so that we can move you up into as a panelist.
I don't see anyone in the attendees list right now. Oh, there's someone there now. Let's see. That's Margaret Montoya in the attendees. I don't see anyone else in the attendees list.
We're looking for a Jacob Garner and a Jana and a Kristen. Is that? I don't see those names either, but I'm just.
Alexandria, I do have a question. We have a document, you know, the recommendations document that we'd love to have screen shared, but if you're able to do that, that'd be great, or if you give me permission to screen share.
Mary Lou, are you able to give screen sharing abilities? I don't have access to controls. I'm sure she'll add you soon.
Okay.
Okay, if Margaret is our only participant or attendee, then maybe we want to go ahead and start, and we'll continue to work on this end.
Okay, thank you, Amy. And Mary Lou, are we able to give her on screen sharing capabilities? You've
Okay.
been made
She says you're a
presenter.
presenter.
Do you see it at the right bottom?
It still doesn't light up for me. It's
Is it the document that was sent out?
yes, yeah. So if you're able to pull it up, that'd be fantastic. It's telling me open system preferences and read. So it might be cool if you did the screen share, Alexandria.
I don't have sharing capabilities either, but perhaps we can get started. And I see Mary Lou is managing several WebExes right now, and so she'll pass it over to Amy. But it did go out today, and so if folks can pull that up and have access to it, let's start that way, and then we'll work to get you the share.
That sounds great.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's still not allowing me. I keep trying. Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. So Alyssa and I are just gonna take turns going over the document, but we're gonna do that briefly since you have the document anyway. This is really for anyone able to access it or hasn't seen it. And then it might be useful to spend a little bit of time with questions or, you know, just getting suggestions or recommendations or whatever it is that we need to do to make this stronger. So just starting at the top with the recommendations only, I'll split it up into 3 focus areas. And the first one was pre-K to grade 12 education. And we had some short-term suggestions there and some long-term, and then higher education, short-term, long-term, and then civic engagement. So Alyssa and I will just take turns giving you maybe a little bit of the context or substance in addition to what's in there as well, but we'll keep this very brief. So the first short-term suggestion is one that I know is on everyone's radar. So it's one that's tied to reducing institutional racism bill, which is being hopefully introduced by Senator Lopez in this coming session as well. And so we're hoping that it will look somewhat like SB 7 that was in the special session. And, you know, from every discussion we had, we really feel like this one is an overarching, it will have overarching impact on what happens in our state in reducing structural racism more so than any of the other ones. And it really does address key components of transformation, you know, whether it's tied to the pay equity or retention, community engagement. I think our only concern regarding this bill is that as it goes into committees, certain things will be changed and adapted. And so how do we really emphasize the priority areas of the bill, right? And it shouldn't end up just being about training. There's so much more in there, right? Whether it's tied to the hiring and, you know, the community engagement piece. And I think the bottom line was the tracking and accountability to make sure, because oftentimes policies are put into place And it's really at the implementation stage that things don't happen. And so the tracking and accountability mustn't be taken out of the committee, in the different committees. And so how to advocate for that. Alyssa, you want to share a little bit about the ethnic studies curriculum?
Yes, let me see. Yeah, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. We changed programs here, and I wasn't sure what we were doing. The ethnic studies field is really important. I have talked with people that I know here in Las Cruces, and the thing is that Latinos and Native Americans in this state, which I'm going to focus on those two because that's a Yazi Martinez thing, is that we're invisible. And so people we don't know our history. And what that happens is that people then begin to not, to take positions or to do things that are not in our best interest. So the ethnic studies bill is really, really important. And the research has shown that the curriculum really contributes to critical thinking and to student empowerment. And I'm remembering a story here in Las Cruces. You all know of Cervantes. She is an author, and she had written some books, and she was having she was presenting her book, and there were a whole bunch of kids that were just so excited. And so the newspaper went over and asked them, "Why are you so excited?" And they said, "Because we can see ourselves." And so ethnic studies is really, really important because a lot of kids in New Mexico cannot see themselves anywhere reflected in the curriculum. So we really want to push this idea of having an ethnic studies curriculum bill.
Thanks, Alyssa. And one thing that we definitely spoke about during the sessions when we were looking at the ethnic studies bill was how this state has perpetuated the tricultural myth as well, right? And so how, and some of what we say in the long-term, recommendations is tied to making sure it's from pre-K to 20 that we have ethnic studies. And that it's about understanding all of the groups represented in our country, not just cultures. So another piece that is tied to that is the fact that you cannot have an ethnic studies bill unless there is real preparation of teachers in a way that can administer and build the curriculum and deliver the curriculum for those students. And so we highly recommend this executive order or some change in the teacher licensure process for not only teachers, but administrators and alternative teacher licensures. And it's to include the anti-racist values and practices that align with everything that's in Yazi Martinez and everything that's in the ethnic studies bill, right? So it's a way to make sure that that it's normalized in our education process. So this would affect colleges of education. This would affect how professional development is also done in the schooling system. So we felt this one is very much hand in hand with the last one. And it's a very short-term one. We had representatives from PED that helped us understand that currently there isn't much in there regarding equity or inclusion, let alone anti-racism. So it makes good sense to have this as part of it. Alyssa?
Okay, the next one was that Mimi Stewart is in the process of writing a bill that would institute accountability and funding for the district equity councils. And if you will recall, Yazi Martinez required that all the school districts have equity councils. but they're all over the place in terms of how they're doing and how they're preparing, what their membership is. And so we're asking that that be standardized, that we need equity. We need to be sure that the equity councils have a real clear mandate, that they have some funding, that they can, really keep and really bring the community focus into education. And so this is just now being drafted, but we really would like for you to watch for that and to really support this, because it's really important. That's one of the really important pieces, I think, of the Yazzie Martinez case.
Okay, thanks, Alyssa. And then some of the long-term strategies regarding this sort of pre-K education focus is looking at legislation that requires anti-racist education in the licensure program, and it's really, that is part of that long-term vision of how it should be from pre-K onwards, and same with the ethnic studies and critical multiculturalism. Alyssa, do you want to add anything on those first two?
No.
And then baby bonds, this is something, so it's definitely New Jersey that took this on, but there's so much to be learned about really closing that racial wealth gap through baby bonds. And so this idea is something that we should be looking at as we move forward. And then the final one was the piloting of real sort of community-driven anti-racism conversations in schools. And that gets at the heart of almost everything we spoke about in this committee, was that if we really get intentional about having community-driven perspectives in the education system, it's going to give us even more insights, ideas, and long-term strategies for making schooling anti-racist. And so bringing that community perspective throughout and doing it in an intentional way, not the odd forum here and there, but having councils set up and having advisory groups and having decision makers that are, part of the educational process. Priority focus area 2 was higher education. So the short-term strategies were, the first one is to introduce and support legislation to expand New Mexico higher education, general education curriculum to include ethnic studies or anti-racist focus for courses for the first year of higher ed in a 4-year public institution. And we wanted to separate it out from the 2-year because we feel like we're very close to helping to make this happen in the 4-year, and we'd be one of the first in the nation. The hope is that, and we have these constant conversations in higher education about that first year experience. What should it look like? How can it be so that it gives a foundation to the education that the students receive and shapes their thinking, what should be done in our state? There's nothing more influential than having that ethnic studies curriculum right up front. We know from all the research that it'll impact every single student's ability to succeed in other subject areas as well. So it's not just in that one ethnic studies class or that ethnic studies curriculum that they're engaged in. It actually helps ground them in a way that actually leads to success in all other areas of whatever they study. So for the first year experience, it seems essential. And we really believe that we can make this happen in the 4-year institutions because we have the faculty, we have the staff, we have the mechanisms in place to make this happen. And we've got some piloting of things going on. So our committee members, we didn't mention all of whom's there, but you can see them on the list. So many of them have experience, like Nancy Lopez and I have been working at UNM on piloting this US and global diversity and inclusion curriculum at the university level, which has, went through all the committees and was recommended. And now no UNM student can graduate without taking at least one class in addressing the sort of power, equity, inclusion. And so we know it can happen. We know it's just a matter of helping our institutions understand how. Alyssa, you want to take the next one?
Well, see, yeah, so one of the things that we need to do is to include the community colleges, because there's a lot of students that go to community college but don't go to the universities. And it's important that they also get that education. And so we're supporting, or we're proposing that to introduce and support legislation to expand the curriculum, the ethnic studies curriculum, to the 2-year public colleges.
Mm-hmm. And the same goes for the graduate degrees, right? And this might seem like a higher, might be more of a long-term strategy, but we know that every single field of studies can incorporate, if it wanted to, have that equity inclusion perspective from an ethnic studies lens. And there are current initiatives going on that we can learn from in New Mexico. So it is more of seeing those pilot projects and seeing how they can be expanded to cut across all graduate degrees.
Okay, then. Okay, this is, I think, a really important one, and that is that we really talked about this as having the governor or anybody who has an appointed authority or anybody who's doing hiring, that they put an equity lens on everything that they're doing, so that we're asking the question, in the case of higher education, when the governor appoints a regent, that she puts on an equity lens and I really asks that person, where are you with regard to these issues? Because that person is the one that it really brings that anti-racism, equity plus perspective then to the higher education. So it's not just the regents, but I think that's a really important one. But we really want that equity lens put in with all of the leadership positions, boards, and commissions that have to do with higher education. And that's really important because it has to start there. If that person or those persons don't have that commitment, then we don't begin to normalize this. What we want to do is we want to normalize anti-racism. And the way you do that is by having leaders on board that believe in that and that live it. So.
Yeah, and once again, there's piloting of that language. We at UNM, we have it in for faculty and staff, demonstrated commitment. The language is there. It took us 4 or 5 years to make that happen, but it did happen and everyone's sitting with it. The next one was really to introduce and support legislation to create permanent funding for Latinx, Chicano, Mexican American, and other Black, Indigenous, Asian Pacific Islander, Arab, as well as other historically racialized, stigmatized, and underrepresented students for doctoral fellowships. By the way, that real sort of wordy introduction, that took us a while because we definitely feel like if we don't name sometimes, it does sort of create that invisibility that often happens to Blacks and Asians for sure in New Mexico. So we just wanted to make sure that we had that in place, and we need to do more and more of that. But this is where there are, it's all about things have already been put in place, right? But we need to expand it. And that's what we're here as well. And it truly is an investment in New Mexico. And we can have parts of it that help keep those doctoral students in our state as well. So that, would be to incentivize having ways to keep them and have local, people of color that are recruited into it was one of the ways that we thought that would incentivize to stay, because they have those connections and family and others in the state. And so that would be a great way to expand that program and invest in New Mexico as a whole. So long-term suggestions. So these are, once again, tied to initiatives that are being thought out currently in different places, but definitely the creating an institutional ethnography project. And that can be something that's a gift to New Mexico that would actually engage faculty, staff, students, people in the community around that sort of digital, humanities lab that can be created. And so classes can be connected, research can be connected. It's a tangible way for engagement and a way to make sure that we document. And that then becomes useful for future classes and education for our state as a whole. This next one, the incentivized work study, do you want to add, Alyssa, for the next few?
No, that's fine. Go ahead and do that.
Yeah, so work study. We know the power of having young people utilize their work study funds in community with community. It's life-changing for them. And we know the government has certain mandates on it should be 7% of the work study population in community with community, but we as institutions do not really, we'll comply to that, but we don't encourage it or expand. We just do the compliance piece, right? And what we need to do is understand the power of having those work study students with community and in anti-racist social justice projects. We're not utilizing that in the way it should be. And yeah, anything else, Alyssa, you want to add with this?
No, I just think, I just want to emphasize that that's a really important thing, is that students then begin to work in the community and begin to look at that community in a different way. And, it's just, we're just losing out on a lot of, I can't even think of the word I want, but anyway, it's really important. And we're committed to that.
Yeah, and it's a leveraging of funds, right? That statewide consortium or center is also something that has been piloted in different ways. We've had experiments of taking students from the northern New Mexico, central New Mexico area down to the border, and we did a Core Without Borders initiative where the students would get to learn and understand from professors, members. Those kinds of initiatives were piloted, they were powerful, and yet they weren't uplifted to become a norm of what we do in higher education. I think we need to go back to some of those phenomenal ideas that once the funding ran out, it all died down. We need to find out how we can uplift them. And one of them that never made it to even piloting stage was the College for Social Transformation. Powerful, powerful initiative that had community, faculty, staff, student support, but it was right before 2008, and because of financial constraints, that it never happened. But it was a hub and a powerful initiative to really bring about almost everything we've talked about into a college and really see how would this work. And that would be a great place to start, actually. Focus area 3, youth civic engagement, leadership development. Do you want to start, Alyssa, with the short term?
Well, one of the things that we think is really important is the voter registration, and that we really want the Secretary of State to move to facilitating that, and it's important that we do that. And I think to some extent it's probably happening now. We just want to focus that it's really, really important that we need to give that more attention. And then again, Karen had already mentioned this before, but it's work study programs and opportunities to be able to give the students more experience in terms of racial justice work and anti-racism. So I think.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. And then the long-term suggestions, just, you can see them there, but the language to leverage existing resources so that programs like AmeriCorps are required to include racial justice as part of their request for proposals, right? So we could do that with so many, RFPs and different ways of changing how the state values anti-racist, social justice language, and if it's infused into the RFPs, then we will get what we ask for, right? And we're not doing some of that. And then an executive order to engage in creating a racial justice media consortium, because media, as we all know, what's normalized, what isn't. Alyssa, you want to end us up on some of this?
Well, I think one of the other things that we came up with is that we'd like to introduce legislation to create internships, to create those reporters that are reporting on these stories, but that they have a broader perspective in terms of what is it that's going on, not just a more limited view. So I think this is really important, and I know that, I don't know, Karen, does UNM have a school of journalism?
They have a communication and journalism, college.
Oh, okay.
Department, sorry. And it's phenomenal, but it does, it could do with focus, in this area. And the final. Go for it, Lisa.
No, I was going to say here at New Mexico State, we have a big one too, and it's really tied to public broadcasting. So it would be a really important piece.
Final is actually one of the most important things, and that was that we spent a lot of time having dialogue on the permanent fund, and so we as a committee wholeheartedly support the working groups, suggestions, recommendations on the permanent fund with regard to early childhood education and, family literacy. We spent a lot of time talking about the importance of that, because it gets at the heart of how, if you lay that foundation from the beginning, a lot of the unlearning doesn't have to happen later on, right? And in all sorts of ways. So that and the data working group, that hasn't been listed on here, but both of those two were ones that we definitely highly recommend. Should actually started with that statement at the top because it was important to us.
I would just like to say, Karen, one of the things is that in New Mexico, I think that we've really not taken advantage of the fact that we've got a multicultural, multilingual community that hasn't really been educated in valuing that. And in a globalized economy, that could be an absolute, it could be a big positive if we acknowledge that, and so that would help put us on the map in many, many ways. So education, I think, is anti-racist education, ethnic education is really, really important.
Thank you, Alyssa. Any questions, comments, any concerns?
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Elisa and Dr. Katira, and the work of the Education Subcommittee. Really incredible. I will open up for questions, comments now. Anyone has any? We'll go Mr. Sanchez, Dr. Sanchez, and then Dr. Patel, are you able, did you have anything you wanted to add or just what's in the comments?
I have to be in and out, so I'll try to type as I go.
If not, we'll read them out. Thank you. Mr. Sanchez.
Yeah, I just wanted to compliment you on the hard work you did. That report was awesome. And it is a lot of work and time that you've devoted to this. And you've captured, I think there's a thread that's going through all this that's bringing it together. And that thread of education and how we change the future is by that ethnic education and that awareness. So I'm very happy with the report. Thank you so much for all your time and work and your expertise.
Thank you. That committee was amazing. The committee members, I wish they could all be here, and everyone that came to present to us as well. We had Alexandria and others, Amy and Tammy were bringing in so many people that we had a major education in the process. So it was great to be on that committee. There was some comments I think Dr. Patel and others had made. If someone could uplift some of those so that we could hear, because there's this whole string and I don't know if I'll catch it.
We'll do that. We'll go to Dr. Sanchez now, and then I'll read Dr. Patel's.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your research and work and presentation here. I just want to uplift some concern, right? When we look at ethnography and just thinking about community voice, and also what I was looking at within the data group as well around really, especially when we get universities involved in community-based education, which is what we want to encourage, but also that place of really having the state of New Mexico adopt some really clear, data sovereignty wording and languaging. I know that we want to, as Indigenous communities, encourage this type of educational sharing, but there's also been this place of research and gathering of information that necessarily serve our Indigenous communities. And does that research come in? So I think there has to be some really clear thought and language incorporated in this particular piece. I'm also curious around not just higher education and K through 12 or pre-K, but how we can influence New Mexico's curriculum, also pushing out which is also education, right? Community-based education, whether that's prevention through the Department of Health or others. Because I know as a community-based organization, we're creating our own curriculum as we're going. And we're trying to understand how the state of New Mexico chooses curriculums, whether that's in the prevention field and others, that they push out to community. And so we know that there in New Mexico, where we have a strength of Hispanic and Indigenous multilingual communities, that type of curriculum development is important. So how do we also ensure that is coming into this language around education, so that we're not just taking a narrow view of education as the PED and that particular piece, but also throughout the departments within the state of New Mexico, and encouraging that type of research and community-based research that's coming out, because those are also critical programs that our young people are in, that our college students are in, outside of the formal school system. And oftentimes community-based programs are invited into. And also looking at the criteria for teachers, especially in the language realm, right? Because it's been this place of we want to have language teachers, but then we go to a certification program. So just rethinking like kind of what that would look like, so that our elders and others can come into the school setting, or the students can look at those community-based programs that already exist within our community, our tribal communities, and have those have as much weight within their academic schooling terms. So I think those are just a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. Thank you so much.
I love everything you just said, Corinne. It makes absolute sense. So know that, and you know that language needs to be put in there, but know that the background of Nancy and I is in community-based participatory research with Nina Wallerstein and others, and Lorenda and so many great people. But I think you're so right that if we don't put in that language and we're not intentional about it, it'll be business as usual, right? With higher ed being its oppressive self. So I 100% agree with that. And I like that piece that you just brought in, because education is in those departments and it's continuously, we brought it in with the AmeriCorps stuff, right? We were saying all those RFPs and things, they don't use the language that we think should be in there, right? But what we should add to that is also, like, even once something's in place, the professional development, the education, the kind of knowledge that's put out there needs to be community driven and community based, and has to have an anti-racist, anti-colonial kind of perspective. Absolutely. I would be very happy to put that in. I think that's a great idea. And then the criteria for teachers. I work with the Native American Community Academy, and the power of having that sort of indigenized education, not only for Indigenous people, but for all peoples, right, is something that I have the honor of learning about. And I would love to have that infused in here. We're actually, we have one of the first inspired schools in Albuquerque to be in the international district for a multiracial group of people indigenize their education. I am so excited about that, because it's the whole notion of traditional ways of being need to be something that we all connect with, right? And to value and uplift, and to have our own seeking of knowledge, in that way, with community. So Corinne, I wish you'd come to our subcommittee meetings, because everything you've said is right on. And so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Any other questions, comments? Dr. Patel says he commends the Education Subcommittee on your proposal, and that he wanted to highlight and particularly support the language around specifically supporting Black and Indigenous doctoral candidates, as there is a special disparity in our state in this regard. And he asked if the subcommittee discussed supporting funding early childhood education, teacher salaries, etc., through a racial justice lens.
Yes, 100%. In fact, so yes to both of those. What we do need to do, though, in that recommendation is highlight the fact that there are disparities between, if you look at the data, even at UNM, and I bet you NMSU is exactly the same, Black and Indigenous PhD graduate students are so much less than any other group, and it's exponentially less, right? So we do need to focus on those two groups in particular. And then the notion of the second part was regarding
teacher salaries.
Teachers, yeah. It's the ethnic, so the anti-racist lens to early childhood education is something that I've been singing the song about for the longest time with people who are advocates of utilizing the permanent fund for early childhood education. If it is not with an anti-racist lens, having public education, just be what it is right now, right? Perpetuating the disparities, increasing the gap, And so it wouldn't make as much difference for people to have early childhood education if it didn't have an anti-racist lens. Definitely, because it would be like going back to the days when we were wanting to have free public education. If that was done in a way that didn't create the mess we're in, we wouldn't spend all these hundreds of years trying to undo it, right? So I would hate for that to happen with early childhood education, that we'd have this huge disparity, and then 100 years from now, we're like, oh, we need to change early childhood education. Now's the moment to make sure we do it right, so that we're not unlearning and undoing for hundreds of years. So yeah, but once again, it's back to, we didn't put it in the recommendations, so I'm going to make sure that it goes in there and is clear, because we had that conversation. But yeah, it needs to go in the document.
Thank you. I also wanted to lift up a comment or a suggestion by Margaret Montoya, who's on the Health Subcommittee, that's in the comments, where she suggests the language read graduate and professional degree programs.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, that was an oversight as well. I like that.
Oh, sorry. That's not an oversight. It's an existing statute that we're adding to. And so the existing statute is for doctoral programs. So that if we move it away from the rules into going back to the legislature, we then can add graduate programs. But at this time, that is a statute that says doctoral programs.
Okay. So how would it be worded in the recommendations? We'd have to say it's an expansion on, or?
Perhaps you just make the suggested language a longer term recommendation.
Okay. Great.
There's also, and Dr. Katir and Elisa, there's talk about critical race theory in the chat as well. And I know you all spent a lot of time talking about that in your committee meeting hearings. Do you want to address that directly?
So the question was, say the question again. I'm looking for it in the chat.
That we link critical race theory with ethnic studies.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
what
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we talked long and hard about this as well, and it would be good to do that. I think we have to, because especially when we're talking about the higher ed component, don't fully understand how ethnic studies should have that CRT lens. And so I think it would be great. Yeah, I'm looking at, there's a robust pushback to CRT because it has changed student thinking and motivated institutional structural change. So this is where we talked about intersectional lens, right? So Nancy Lopez's research and a lot of her work has looked at how everything is intersectional, and even critical race theory with an intersectional lens, we as a committee strongly believe would be needed. And as for the pushback, that's tied to us. We had a civic engagement kind of perspective in our educational subcommittee as well. And we want to bring, and I think it would make sense to bring it in there for sure, because it is about social transformation. It's about how CRT actually helps people transform society in a way that uplifts all. And I think we can bring that in our third focus group area. And Yeah. So I don't.
I would just say that one of the things about having a robust pushback is that that's why we need good leaders.
Yeah.
It's so if you have presidents or professors or regents that believe, have gone through the process and we know where they are, then the pushback is not going to be as difficult because your leadership across the state and everything is on board.
Mm-hmm. And it's to do with that whole notion of like, if you want your education to have purpose and to have application, surely it should be for social transformation for the good of all, right? And so how to bring that CRT with an intersectional lens into that part, so starting with language that's sort of inclusive of people that may, not fully understand why you'd want to do it, and then bringing them along in terms of that's what CRT with intersectional lens is, right? It's literally making your education purposeful. Corinne, you had something as well.
Yeah, I think with that lens that we're talking about right now, I think the languaging should also include administrators. We focus on teacher licensure, we focus on teacher skill development, but again, you want the top down and the bottom up, right? We want it both ways. And if the administrators are still making policies within their schools, or they're in charge of the, there can be these mandates from the state, also those principals, those administrators, those budgeters should also have the same type of training that their teacher, that we're expecting teachers to have, because they're the builders of that whole systemic place within our educational processes.
Administrative license listed as well in, needing, so the changes in admin license are there. But thing we're trying to do in just our little district here in APS is push the school board to have some of that education. So I've been working with Families United for Education for the longest time in pushing the school board to have anti-racist education that has a critical race theory intersectional lens, right? So it's not just a diversity implicit bias kind of microaggressions thing, right? We're not about that, but we're saying, hey, you really need to understand structural racism and how the education system that you are heading in APS, and you're perpetuating that structural racism. And so the interesting thing is we've had most of the school board agree to do that. And so I think we need to go at that level, right? Get school board members and others as well. But I think that's what needs to be added to our recommendation. We had admin licenses.
Thank you so much. Again, so appreciate all of this. And so with some of the suggested language, we'll be looking to approve this, accept this report as a part of the recommendations that we move forward. And so I just want to make sure that Dr. Katira and Elisa, you all are willing to include some of the additional language discussed tonight, because that won't have the chance to come back before the full committee, before we move it forward. So when we decide whether to adopt it or not, as happened at the last meeting, I'm sure it'll include asking that language be added.
Oh yeah, happily. I'd say happily add the language. It felt like a brainstorming session. So yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. Any final questions or comments? If you have a moment to view the chat box, there's lots of appreciation and gratitude being shared there.
This is work of like our hearts, right? It's been everyone that's on the committee wants to do the right thing. So know that we're all passionate about this, and we do this in our day jobs. And so getting a chance to contribute here has been a privilege. And thank you, Senator Lopez. She came to almost all of our meetings. So that was good.
If I may, Madam Chair, just to say thank you. All of them, but it was so uplifting to hear your conversation, the information. And I am hopeful that at some point we can have a similar type of dialogue with my colleagues in the legislature. It would be so uplifting, but we'll work on that. But just say thank you. Thank you to each of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
I
all.
also wanted to add, I think that what I was screen sharing, what went out today, I think it was missing the potential legislation that that Elisa talked about, Senator Stewart is going to be introducing for funding and accountability for district equity councils under priority focus area number 1.
I think it's there.
Was it on there?
It was on there because
Okay, I've read all of these today, so my eyes may be crossing. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's on there.
It was
Okay,
on there because I also read pieces of that. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
It's all good.
So we're going to need to vote to accept the education subcommittee's recommendations and full report. If you want to come on camera, which will make that process easier, or put your vote in the chat, we can do that.
Chair, I so move that we accept.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, to the Education Subcommittee, thank you for your incredible work on this report.
It was a pleasure.
All right, we're going to move now to the data work group recommendations, which I believe Jennifer and Janine, are you prepared to present? Jennifer or Janine?
Hi, this is Jennifer. No, I'm actually not. I thought that Nancy would be presenting, so I am not prepared.
Okay.
So Nancy, Dr. Lopez did say that she was unavailable to join us today. She actually teaches a class on Monday evenings. So do we want to, Janine and Jennifer, would you like us to move to discussion without a formal presentation?
Sure. I just want to be very transparent that the bulk of the work I believe was done by Nancy, so I'm not really comfortable leading the discussion on that.
Okay.
Karen, would you be interested in coming back in as a panelist? I know this is something that was talked quite a bit about in the education subcommittee. Would you be interested in coming in for questions as well? If you want to put that in the chat or the Q&A.
I'm sorry, I'm also on the road and in and out of service, so I can't present as well. But I just wanted to look up the majority of the work as Lisa.
Thank you for letting us know. I see Dr. Katira here. Are you able to speak to any of this?
So I think I agree with Jennifer that since Nancy so I'll tell you that I'm a part of the Institute for the Study of Race and Social Justice, and this is a group that UNM's campus looks at data and really tries to utilize data to drive decision making, but around anti-racist social justice policy making. But it's Nancy that leads that group, and this is really her life's work. So it would be such a shame not to have her there. But maybe if there's questions, I could honestly answer the things I can answer, and what I can't, I'll just say, Nancy can send you an email regarding that. So.
Thank you for that. I was also going to suggest if folks have had a chance to read through the briefing memo that was provided and have specific questions, feedback, or comments that they would like to see edits or additions made, we can take note of that this evening and provide that back to the work group so that those can be made so that we don't have to do another round of presentation and edits.
And by the way, I'm just texting Nancy to see if there's any way possible she can just come 5-10 minutes and tell her class, hey, go read something.
Thank you.
And this is Corrine. I'd just like to reiterate the comments that I made earlier around really the process around data and data collection and the voice of Indigenous and Hispanic communities, really just around the languaging of data sovereignty. Even within the institution of UNM, right? There are still some sovereignty issues with tribal communities and collection of information. And I'd really like to have that kind of languaging or stressed across, especially also in this time of COVID, there's a lot of collection of data. And again, how do tribal communities and others maintain that sovereignty? How are we looking at community-based organizations in that same light that is coming in with this information and how it's utilized? And I really feel like the state of New Mexico, with the vulnerable populations that we have, that we could be the forefront of this type of languaging to ensure that type of protection for our tribal communities and also our immigrant communities, all of those vulnerable communities that we look at when we talk about at risk, when we talk about educational disparities and things like that.
I can answer to that one, and I can say that the community-based participatory research that needs to be infused in all the data collection and data, analyzing and recommendations and all the rest of whatever research is done has been part of the conversation, but it hasn't been central in the way it should, in the way Corrine is talking about it, right? So I would say that recommendation does need to be uplifted. So it's there for sure. There's no two ways about it. But I think we need to be specific and intentional about it. And I think we can do that in the language that's used, right? In this recommendation to make sure it's centralized in the way Corrine said, rather than it be one of the conversations.
I also want to add that I know Dr. Lopez ran the suggestion by Michelle Swina, who is an expert on data sovereignty with indigenous populations. So her voice is, while it is not in the recommendations because she's not on the panel, that she was able to provide suggestions on this.
I think the only thing that I can say regarding this is we need that language more in the recommendation document, is what I see.
Thank you for that. Any other questions or discussion regarding the data briefing memo? Okay. We are, Amy, I'm going to lean on you here because Wednesday we have such a full agenda already. And so should we take an action on this tonight? Or should we try to wait to have time for Dr. Lopez to speak to it?
Let me think about that very quickly. I mean, I think it's important to take an action on it tonight, with having kind of an email sent out that if any conversation wants to continue to happen, that, you know, we can do that via email. There's so many work groups that still need to present, and we have to present to the senior staff on Friday so that we don't also have the time to add another meeting. So I'm going to suggest that we go ahead and take an action with the suggestions of changing specific language that Dr. Sanchez has recommended and that Dr. Katira has recommended. And then what I will ask Dr. Lopez to do is maybe send out a short email that gives any thoughts that she had on that people might want to think about in looking at if there's any additional questions.
Thank you, Amy. And so having the briefing memo in writing for you all, is there an action that can be taken? Do we have acceptance of this briefing memo as a part of our recommendations that will be presented?
Madam Chair, I would so move with the addendum just mentioned to be included with what we were just discussing, and also with Dr. Sanchez, what she wrote in the chat.
Thank you, Senator Lopez. Is there a second?
Second that.
I don't know who that was.
Alan.
Thank you. Is everyone in favor of that? All in favor? Any opposed? So thank you for putting that in the chat as well. I appreciate that. All righty. We are also, we have the budget working group that sent their proposal as well. Dr. Adzalu and Counselor Bencomo were not able to make it this evening. So I want to make sure that everyone received that and has had a chance to look over the document. I think we will need to take similar action, express questions here regarding that, that we can then share via email and move that forward or make a decision on that today. Does anybody have any questions or comments regarding the budget work group's report that was sent out?
I just have one. I wasn't sure. I'm sorry, Alexander. On the number 4, an executive order to end the practice of suspending driver's licenses for unpaid fines. I'm just not sure. I didn't know people's license would be suspended for unpaid fines. I'm just trying to see what they're talking about.
Senator Lopez, were you about to answer that? Oh.
No, sorry, that was me.
Okay.
What I can do is I can respond to the conversations that I've had with the budget working group, and then if there are additional questions, we can certainly email them. They had multiple conversations about how a lot of times the driver's license and then other court fees and things like that because so much of our courts are overrepresented. People of color are overrepresented in our courts because they're overrepresented in our policing, and they're overrepresented in how we go after folks for rules, is that very often the suspending of licenses is a huge burden on people of color, and that actually is stopping many people of color in our state from being able to not just to being able to pursue some very different career options. And so they were thinking that was definitely a racial justice issue that we should get involved in looking at, as it is interfering with people of color's ability to pursue economic opportunities.
Okay, thank you. My second question is increased funding for teen court and Hobbs. I want to, were you able to be in on that conversation?
So I think, you know, increased funding for teen courts throughout the state would probably be a great idea. Hobbs is not the only teen court in New Mexico, but particularly in the Southeast, there is quite a different impact on our teens in that area. And so they really wanted to look at how do we really work on different responses than criminalizing and putting into our juvenile justice system.
Thank you.
I think that would be one of my questions as well. If we're looking at the teen courts as doing an assessment to see the success, right, of the practice of teen courts, and how are they alleviating any of the concerns? What are their approaches, and then supporting that broad support for teen courts throughout New Mexico with that evidence, if there, or with research or backing, if that exists, or if there hasn't been a study, you know, how do we really look at uplifting it?
Yes, so the suggestion is read to introduce and support a memorial to look very closely at those things. Hobbs was kind of the short-term suggestion, but we can also add in other teen courts as the committee would like us to.
I think those are all really useful suggestions. Thank you for bringing those questions forward and suggestions for Mr. Cotton and Dr. Sanchez. Any other discussion, questions regarding the budget work group's recommendations? So moving forward, is this something we want to adopt and include in our recommendations to the governor in our larger report? Senator Lopez stepped away, so someone else is going to have to make the motion with including further discussion with Dr. Azalu and Councillor Bencomo, and again, just as with the last work group's report, any suggested language being communicated and sent via email.
Can make that motion.
Want to point out. No, go ahead, Mr. Cotton. Go ahead.
No, I can hear what you have to say first.
I just wanted to point out that number 2 and number 3 on this recommendation is also being looked at by our health subcommittee. And so they wanted to put it in here just as a, because we hadn't been able to see the health subcommittees yet, they wanted to put those in here in, I guess, support of what is to come for the health subcommittee.
Thank you, Amy.
So I can make that motion with the additional changes or wording and explanation of the report that's before us.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Is that Rabbi Linick? Are you unmuting?
Dr. Patel, there's a couple in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you all. And so all in favor? I'm watching. Any opposed? Awesome. Okay. Thank you all. That passes. We'll include that and we will provide this feedback to the two that we're working on this work group so that that language can be added. Any announcements or comments, questions? We will have a very full meeting on this Wednesday, the 18th. The Health Subcommittee will be presenting, as well as the remaining work groups that have their reports finalized. And so we'll stick to a tight time schedule. We will not have, unfortunately, we will not have as much time to have as robust of a conversation as we did tonight with the Education Subcommittee, but it's simply because we need to move through all of the committees that are going to be reporting out on Wednesday. So if you're wondering why we don't have more time like we did tonight with education, that will be why. All right. Well, thank you all so much for making an exception on this Monday evening to have this additional meeting. I think it was really productive, and so I'm really grateful for that. If you have any work groups that have not yet submitted your reports, please get those to Amy so that we can get them out to the full council for review in advance of Wednesday's meeting. Amy, do you have any other announcements?
Are you making space for my public service announcement? I just want to remind people that we have, gone to the increased look at the executive order. So please, everyone, stay home as much as you can and be safe. And I look forward to seeing you on Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful evening. Be well.